School walkouts were only the beginning. This weekend, thousands of anti-gun protesters are descending on Washington, D.C. They'll be demanding that government restrict our right to bear arms. What they probably won't be marching for is better law enforcement. Maybe they should, because Nikolas Cruz was only able to carry out that massacre because both police ignored warnings about his behavior and then cowered in fear during the shooting itself. Meanwhile, at Great Mills High School in Maryland today, a potential mass shooting was halted when an armed school resource officer confronted a gunman who had shot two students. Only the gunman was killed. Jason Nicholas is a University of Maryland professor, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
So, look, I understand people have different opinions about the Second Amendment, how far its protections extend, what gun control laws work or what don't. But you can't look at the massacre that will be commemorated this weekend and come away not concluding, if you're honest, that the problem was the laws in place were not enforced, that someone who was clearly a threat and known to be a threat was ignored, was allowed to buy a gun, and that the police on the scene, 4 of them, did nothing to stop the massacre. That's all factual, and it's being ignored in favor of attacking the NRA. Why is that?
So I think there are a couple of things. Number one, I'll tell you just personally, I'm pro-responsible gun ownership and pro-gun control. And I think one of the things that's a problem is we frame this argument as if, those two things can't coexist. I think as far as Nikolas Cruz, I think that some of the things you were saying are correct. But when we talk about the Great Mills situation, it's someone who, by all accounts, was a good kid, had no problems, respectful, an honor student, but had access to a gun.
But wait
and
a
that's
second.
and that's becomes the big problem.
There are, of course, millions of students who meet that description of access to guns who don't hurt anybody. In the case of Nikolas Cruz...
Well, I don't think should millions of young children...
Well, they have access in that there are millions of American homes where people safely keep firearms.
Yeah, well, if they
for
safely
protection.
keep them...
No, but look, there are lots of kids...
have access.
No, I mean, kids hunt, actually, in rural America. Lots of them. And in some places, they bring their rifles to school during deer season. They don't hurt anybody. This has been going on for generations, okay? That's the truth of it.
Okay.
So the point is, here you have someone with demonstrable mental illness who should not legally have been allowed to buy a gun, but was because the authorities ignored it. So if you really care about stopping school shootings, why are we ignoring that? I don't know. I'm really honestly confused.
I understand what you're saying. I also believe that one of the issues is the fact that he was, I believe, 19 years old and was able to buy a pistol. Now, I think that that's a problem.
Okay,
because
but again, he wasn't legally allowed to buy any gun because he was mentally ill and known to be mentally ill. He was the subject of scores of police complaints.
We're not going to disagree
here
on Nikolas Cruz.
No, but hold on. This is an actual massacre in which 17 people died.
Absolutely.
Nobody on the left is saying word one about it. They're, in effect, protecting the people who failed by not calling them out on their failures in favor of making statements about the NRA, which was not involved in any way in this massacre. So I'm questioning the good faith here.
I think what they're trying to do is cover all bases. I've heard people say that there was wrong on the part of law enforcement, that people should have picked this up earlier with Nikolas Cruz. But like I said, with young Rollins today, he was not somebody that the FBI or law enforcement could have picked up on.
We don't know that, actually. We didn't know much about Nikolas Cruz because the authorities hid their own failures for the first week.
What his neighbors have said.
But we don't know. It just happened. I'm just saying, this guy killed 17 people. So, look, here, very quickly, this is the question I want to ask the organizers of the march, but they're too cowardly to come on and explain. But it's a simple question. What specific law are we calling for here?
I think that there are many things that they're calling for. They're calling for an end to bump stocks. They're calling for a raise in the age limit. We have a kid who's 18 or 19. They're
calling for an end to bump stocks. So they're celebrating.
Whoa, hold on. I haven't finished. Okay. I haven't finished. We have kids that we say are not mature enough or emotionally intelligent enough to take a drink of alcohol, but we're willing to give them a deadly weapon.
Okay, then let me ask you, do you really believe that if we're to ban bump stocks, and the president, I think, is doing it unilaterally anyway, and raise the age for firearm purchases to 21, you think we'd end school shootings?
I think we would limit some of those school shootings.
You do think that?
I do believe so.
Is there evidence of that? Is that a guess?
Well, I think, when we look at Nikolas Cruz...
Well, he was already not allowed to buy a gun, but the authorities, because they didn't want to add to the sum total of school discipline cases, didn't say anything about it.
If he were 21, he probably would not have been able to get into that school. I think that
he wasn't allowed to buy a gun in the first place under existing law, but the people in charge didn't feel like enforcing it.
Again, we're not disagreeing.
Right, so it wouldn't have stopped that because that would have been stopped by another law that we passed.
If you get rid of, well, since you wanted to bring up bump stocks, if you get rid of bump stocks, a lot of people in Las Vegas, since, we're talking about gun violence generally, a lot of people would have still been alive and maybe things could have happened differently.
A bump stock makes it almost impossible to hit anything, and I'm not sure that we know what percentage of people were killed. He didn't exclusively fire with a bump stock, and anyone who knows anything about guns, it's a ridiculous device that makes the gun impossible to control. I'm just saying, nobody cares
he wasn't
about bump
looking.
stocks.
He wasn't sniping people. Right. He was going and shooting and mass.
I'm just worried we're not really addressing the real issues here. If we're talking about, you know what I mean?
No,
bump stocks.
I think that there are some issues that you are correct that we need to do a better job of enforcement. But when we also look at gun violence generally, we can look at somewhere like Alaska, for example, which has the highest rate of gun violence, gun deaths per capita, and you don't need a permit to buy a weapon. You don't need a permit to carry a weapon.
No, it's not. Your stats are totally wrong. It's suicide that's Alaska's problem. It has to do with a lot of cultural
that's an issue as well.
Nothing to do with guns. Anyway,
and then Louisiana, Mississippi. But
great to see you, Professor. Thank you.
Absolutely, always fun.